Hello, and welcome to Fireside with the VC. My name is Andrew Romans, and I'm very happy to have Ed Lascelles from Albion VC on the podcast. Ed, great to see you. It's been a long time. How you doing?
I'm very good. Thank you, Andrew. A pleasure to be here and great to see you too, especially in your glamorous location.
Yeah, so glamorous location to be disclosed. I'm in Palm Desert, which is right next to Palm Springs, most people have heard of, in state of California. So same time zone, but very different climate. Good to see you, man. Hey, I'm sorry. I know the lockdown in London is getting intense. I hope it's a quick and effective lockdown. You're putting up with a lot of stuff while being in the most expensive city in the world.
Yeah. I think I was just saying this to a few people here in London. We have all the compromises of living in a city, in a particularly big and dirty, cramped city, but you get none of the benefits. And so, going to see a band or go to a theatre, get some culture, go to a party, go to a bar, go to a restaurant, all these things, which is why you live in a city. None of that is happening. And here I am in my back room once again, as I've done for most of the year. Yeah, it's pretty hard work, but the vaccine news is encouraging, so feeling pretty positive.
I think next year will be better than this year. So, and where is your office? Is it? Are you guys in Farringdon? Where is your?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Farringdon, which is it's just a great part of London.
It is,
and it's sort of both. It's got a bit residential. It's quite leafy. It's quite a sort of expansive feeling place. Very different to like the city, which was the old days of many financial businesses, I guess. So yeah, it's a great location.
That's really cool. I mean, in the old days, Mayfair was, so my office was 48 Charles Street, which was right on the edge of Berkeley Square. And back then I felt like I needed to be in Mayfair to, be part of the club there. But then things started moving to Shoreditch. I always lived in Kensington and Notting Hill. What's your patch of London? I mean, Farrington's so cool.
Yeah, no, Farrington, I think it's got that sort of, it's got the edge to it, but it's not too much of it. It's actually a sort of aesthetically pleasing part of town, but it's not Mayfair, which is extremely glamorous and expensive. But it's quite interesting, this topic. I haven't even talked about this sort of thing for for a year, and I think it'll be interesting as we come out the other side of the pandemic, as people establish whether or not they're actually going to go back to an office, and the startup scene in particular, where rent is a really significant part of the monthly burn. Like, do you really need it? Do you really need one as big? And where do you have it? And I think the whole sort of concept of an office is up for grabs at the moment. It'd be quite interesting to discuss. But I mean, within that, we when we moved office, we thought about it really hard, because your location really, does say something about, what your offices look and feel like. It's a bit like the clothes you wear. I mean, some people think about it a lot, some people don't. Whatever you're doing, you're communicating something, and you can either choose to take advantage of that, or you can, just let it be what it is. But I think with your offices, it is part of a company's culture and identity. It communicates something to the people that work there. It communicates something to the people that visit. How does that translate into a hybrid or remote first work world? I'd be interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah, it is a big topic. I did a podcast with one of our LPs, who's the chairman of CBRE for San Francisco. Yeah. And so, his job is renting out Salesforce Tower and all that stuff. Yeah. And we did it in, I think, early April, when we were all thinking, now there feels like some certainty around coronavirus, whereas back then, like, nobody knew what was going to go on. And he was saying, like, the idea of taking a bus into San Francisco or down to Mountain View from SF to get to Google, and being crammed in that bus with a lot of people don't really want that. You're going to see more of like pods on every exit, and distributed, so that you don't have to be in central London 4 or 5 days a week. It might be 2 days a month, and more remote. But I remember I had twin boys. When they were born, the home office was dead for me. Like, there's no way I was going to be home there.
Yeah, no. Well, exactly. I mean, there's so many things to think through. We just don't know. I thought, you know, one of the companies in our portfolio, they just done a Myers-Briggs on their entire sort of workforce, and so happened to know, amongst other things, you know, who the introverts and who the extroverts were within the business. And then there's also a middle one in between, which is a bit about, I can't remember what they're called. But anyway, most of the office were classed as either introverts or extroverts. And when they, you know, back in the summer, reopened the office for people to attend on a voluntary basis, they found that it was a very clear correlation that all the extroverts came into the office and all the introverts stayed at home, which is, you don't have to be a genius to have anticipated that. And then the other thing that was not a surprise was that was almost entirely the sales team. And then the
sales guys,
the sales team, the sales guys are all and girls, they're all extroverts, and they all came into the office. And then, you know, the developers, you know, I mean, obviously there were exceptions, but they were mainly at home, very happily at home.
Well, I mean, I'm excited about the ability to be working remotely with my kids. My kids are doing distance learning. There's no meetings in the Valley. There's no events in the Valley. So I might as well be working remotely from somewhere cool. But when I think of London, New York, San Francisco, LA, like these places just give you energy. And maybe Myers-Briggs would call me extrovert, but the energy you get from bumping into you at an event and having a drink and catching up and finding a deal to invest in together, that's the reason to be in London. That's the exciting part, you know.
Yeah, well, I completely agree. You know, it's a world city, and it's, you know, it's inspiring and exciting as a result. And you know, literally in every type of background and experience, you know, somewhere in the city. And cities, you know, are the original, you know, example of a network effect. You know, like, you know, the more people that come there, the more possibility that happens, which makes it more exciting, and so more people turn up. And you know, every person that arrives makes it more exciting for everyone else, and just gets stronger. And so you do see, you know, like cities having a really, you know, big impact for that reason. And then you get more jobs and the rest. I'm not quite sure how it plays out when, you know, as we know, like a number of cities becoming unbelievably expensive, where commuting is unbelievably painful. So I know, do we end up, you know, 3-day weeks, 2-day weeks in the office? But I mean, in our job, and I'm sure you're the same, you know, like an average day in the old days, you might meet 2 or 3 companies in a day. You might have internal team meetings. You know, you might be pitching to investors. In the evening, you've got an event on. You probably had a breakfast meeting with someone. You might have a lunch with someone. There's coffees, and that. I mean, it's just so much going on in an average day and so much of it is done face to face. You know, if all the events suddenly start picking up and stuff, I wonder if people are still going to be working 2 days a week, or whether they're just come in again because that's where the action is.
Yeah, and also there's travel. I mean, for me, being 20 minutes from San Francisco airport's been important. So when pondering moving to exotic, tax efficient locations, you know, I don't know. I think things are going to open up again, and being close to that airport is going to be important, and being present in these locations is going to be important. But so let's talk about Albion. So Albion Venture Capital, Albion VC is the name of your fund. It must have been near to 20 years ago that I met you there. So tell me, when was it established, and were you there at the beginning? Because I've known you for, I think, 18 years or something like that.
Yeah, I know. I think weren't you fundraising for a comedy business? It was an arts business or something. I can't remember what it was. Anyway, it was, those were the days. I just about remember, because it was 16 years ago when I started. And I was not the first. So Albion begun actually like as a division of a bank. And it was like that, you know, they just didn't have a venture capital arm. They called Close Brothers, and we.
Close Brothers, yeah, Close Brothers is huge.
Yeah,
in
exactly.
Fact, I invested in insurance tech company that was like saying Close Brothers had 70% of the business in the UK.
Yeah, no, so I think it's still the largest independent UK merchant bank. I mean, you know, and it's been around, you know, since the 19th century, and you know, it's a great business. And they were moving into asset management, and they had a private equity arm, and they wanted to set up a VC. So the founding managing partner, Patrick Reeves, set it up in 1996, I think it was, and basically took advantage of the new legislation back then, which was sort of supported the venture capital trust, or the VCT industry as it now exists. And so, the first fund was raised back then. I joined in 2004, so it had already been going quite a long time. By then, I think it got to 70 million pounds of assets under management.
And Ed, can I just ask you a question? Can you explain what VCT is? So I think of you guys as like, you guys and Octopus were like the original VCTs in my memory. So venture capital trust. Explain what that means in the context of being in the United Kingdom.
Right. Okay. And the very quick sort of explainer in the background is the UK government back in the late 90s devised a scheme to encourage retail investors to invest in startups, and which is now something that's interesting to see the US sort of adopt similar legislation, although in a slightly different way. But so back then, this initiative was basically set up to give tax breaks to wealthy individuals in return for them investing in certain companies, and that that has grown up now into two adjacent kind of industries. You've got the EIS industry, which is for individuals to invest directly into a company, and then you have the VCT industry, which are very similar sort of breaks for very similar people, but rather than investing directly into the companies, they invest into a fund which we manage, and the fund.
And I would just say, like, from my own experience, to ask retail investors to make direct investments into startups, I would anticipate their number one mistake is not enough diversification, if nothing else, and absolutely no portfolio construction. And, you make mistakes in your early days. To allow them to have the same tax breaks to put into a near risk-free fund structure with a guy who's been in this since 2004 just seems like
well, and this is the thing. I think, and so I think, I mean, the reality is that actually you get kind of similar people looking at both schemes, but actually I think that the VCT schemes that you're right. There's us and Octopus are the two largest VCT managers, and what we are really good for, I think, is for retail investors who aren't necessarily that close to the companies, don't necessarily understand the sector in a lot of detail, but would like some exposure to the asset class. We are a great way for them to do it. If, however, you as an individual, and let's say you're an ex-operator and you've just come out of a media business and you see a really interesting sort of media tech company, and you're like an angel and you're going to get involved with them and help them on their journey, the EIS scheme is a really good way of incentivizing you to invest as an angel into a company that really well and you're going to be quite close to. And I think it's a really great scheme for that sort of example. But as a sort of, if you're in your 70s and you're trying to put some invest some of your income in a tax efficient way, and you've never kind of been close to tech, I'm not sure that's such a, I mean, some people might like it, but I think VCTs personally would be a better option.
Doesn't the EIS, which is the Enterprise Investment Scheme, which is this tax saving or avoidance scheme, where if you invest in a startup, you avoid some ordinary income tax and I guess maybe minimize your capital gains. Isn't it true that you get only common or ordinary shares as you would? By the way, ordinary shares is what the Brits say for common shares in America.
Yeah, that's right.
Ords, ordinary shares. Isn't it true that you can't get preferred shares?
You can, but you have to. You could. I mean, the simple answer is yes, you can. You just have to structure them quite carefully. But you can have the same economic impact as if you owned preference shares, and you can call them preference shares. Yeah.
Is that like done through a side letter agreement, or how does that work?
No. You can structure the. There's some. I mean, I'll save the technical details, but there'll just be some clauses in the articles of association of a company, which are now fairly common here in the UK, and they'll describe how the preference shares behave in various sort of distributions, and it will have exactly the same economic distribution as if you had straightforward preference shares, but it's just the clauses are about twice as long as they would be if it was just simple press, but they work the same.
So you can invest in an EIS deal and capture those benefits and have participating preferred.
Yep. You can have participating prefs. Yep. You can have non-participating prefs, participating prefs. I mean, every which way you want, you can do it. It's just a bit. It's just complex to make it happen legally in a way that's compliant with the rules.
Okay, so I thought everyone was missing that. So going back, so you guys were spun out, I guess, out of Close Brothers. Is that right?
Yeah. So then I joined in 2004. In 2009, in the sort of depths of the financial crisis, Close Brothers decided it wanted to focus on banking. We saw an opportunity to spin out, and then we created Albion as a standalone entity. And I say, when I joined, I think we had 70 million under management. At that point in time, when we spun out, it was about 180, 190 million, I think we had under management across the various VCTs. And now we are, I think, on the venture side, we've got about 750 million across a range of different funds. The VCTs are still the bulk of our activity.
And that's sterling, so it's about $1 billion on today's horrible exchange rate.
Correct. That's right. Exactly. And I guess just to sort of run up on the venture side then, so we've got the VCTs, which these days we're investing in software companies at Series A, B2B software Series A. And then we also run the UCL Technology Fund, which is a seed stage deep tech fund investing in IP coming out of UCL. And we co-manage that with the UCL business, which is the commercialization arm of UCL.
Okay, and you're a UCL man yourself, aren't you?
I certainly am. Yeah, studied philosophy, which I mean, sort of unexpectedly, could not be a better degree, I don't think, for what I currently do. But
explain that.
Yeah.
Why is that proven to be true?
I think so. In a nutshell, I think in terms of basically, you have to do a lot of first principle thinking when you're investing at the very early stage. It's maybe becoming a bit easier the later stage you go, and the more the more metrics you have, it's a bit more, you're kind of looking at extrapolation and doing different types of analysis. But certainly the very early stage investing is quite sort of first principles, like how do you think a market's going to develop? How does this company have a role to play in this new market? How's it going to differentiate itself? And you just kind of really have to think things through in a lot of depth. And you're just looking at the constructing an argument. I mean, I say it's helpful. Maybe I'm just tricking myself. Maybe it's just luck. But I like to think there's an analytical assessment of a proposition that sits behind our investment judgment.
Well, Ed, so over these many, many years of experience, what are some personalities that you've run into that worked and didn't work, going back to your reading philosophy at UCL days? I mean, like for example, Steve Jobs. I've never met Steve Jobs, but you hear that he was not wearing shoes or socks, barefoot, smelled bad, wasn't showering, and offensive. It doesn't sound like the first guy you'd invest in, but now everyone says, greatest CEO in the country.
Yeah. I mean, so that is an interesting. I wish we were having this chat next week. So we've actually got a session lined up at the end of the week that with the team at Albion, where we're going to be discussing as a team what are the entrepreneurial traits that we've seen, across our own varying experiences, and to sort of discuss this very question. What do we think works and what doesn't work? Because I think we all have our own experiences. It's quite interesting. I'm now picking up from some of the newer members of the team who now started working with us for a while that apparently all the partners have their own types. Like apparently we all have types of entrepreneurs that we individually like. But so with that sort of caveat, there's a completely unprepared, and the fact that I'm being told I have a huge bias on this stuff.
What is your bias that you're being told that you have?
Yeah. So I think where I've come round to, and maybe it's just, I think there is a little bit, if I'm going to be investing in a company and working with that team over the next 7 years plus, and it's a long time and it's really intense along the way. I kind of want to enjoy it. And so if I have two companies, they're both like really appealing and they're both really sexy, and they can go and do something great. But one of them is just like, going to be a nicer bunch of people. All things being equal, so with the same potential, I'm going to go with the people that I like more. And I think, oh my God, am I just being selfish? But I've managed to rationalize it afterwards that I actually think, particularly the way the world's going, where purpose and culture, and there's a sort of consciousness in the zeitgeist that wasn't necessarily front of mind in the 80s, where you had companies sacking the bottom 5% of all employees on a regular basis, to now being very intentional about looking after the mental health of even the most sort of junior member and newest members of the team. And so in that environment, I kind of feel that the leaders are the people that inspire people and inspire their employees to succeed, rather than ruling by fear and scaring and being sort of micromanaging. I think those inspirational leaders are the ones that potentially are the ones that are going to outperform, and in the world that we're moving into, are going to be the ones that succeed. And I think it feels just a bit old-fashioned and a bit 20th century to have the dictatorial maniac at the helm. But maybe just that I prefer the former type of leader. Also, I don't know how much you love your football or soccer, I guess I should say. There's sort of two types of manager, like sort of you have your Guardiolas, unbelievably successful manager, won the Champions League with many different teams, and then you've got Mourinho, who's done exactly the same thing. And then in the one philosophy is the Mourinho philosophy, which is to analyze every single situation to the nth degree and micromanage, so that every single player knows exactly what they're going to do in a certain situation. Like if it is a set piece at this time, and and the free kick's been taken by this person, everyone stands in a certain place, and anyway, whatever it is you do. And then the other end of the spectrum is you have sort of Guardiola, who is, I'm just going to teach the players how to think for themselves, and then I'll just let them go and be free, and they'll just figure it out, and I'll let them figure it out and be empowered, rather than me tell them what to do and micromanage. And I just I prefer watching the Guardiola teams than the Mourinho teams. Well, I used to, until Mourinho took over at Spurs, and now I'm coming around to the micromanaging. But that's another conversation.
Well, I think that startups are all about innovation, and look, you get the big corporates doing what they do, thinking inside of the box, and you've got the startups out there thinking outside of the cubicle, outside of the box, and to try to micromanage and shove these startup people in a box seems like the opposite wrong thing to be doing. I also think that, like, Lou Gerstner from IBM had a great quote that said, "The world's very flat. News travels quickly. There's no real secrets anymore. A secret doesn't stay a secret for very long. It's all about execution, and execution's all about people." Now, that's what Lou would say, because IBM is a people, consulting services business. But I think it is all about the people, and it is all about execution. Yeah. And, even in biotech, you're like, oh, it's about the molecule, it's not about the team. Wrong. It's still about the team. It's still about that guy or that girl who can inspire people to invest after negative efficacy or whatever.
Yeah, so I couldn't agree more with that as well. Which, I mean, it's one of our sort of themes, and something we're researching a lot more is about culture and leadership, and like how you build teams. And in fact, someone's about to join our team to lead this up, exactly. And I mean, she's just incredible. I can't wait to sort of tell you about her when she joins, just to really drive this whole thought process forward. But I can't remember his name is, the management guru from the 50s, 60s. But anyway, the guy, there's a very famous phrase, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I completely believe in that. And I think that the company that demonstrates this more than any other company is Amazon. And I think I bore everyone I know well to death by talking about my sort of respect and love for Amazon. But you just these are arch executors running that company. I still come back to the fact that they were selling secondhand books online, and so 10 years later they're launching a cloud service provider, which is still still bigger than the next 3 cloud service providers combined. And they are out executing the tech companies at their very own game and just staying ahead. And then, some of the other, services they're launching in the background, it's just a frightening sort of company. And that sort of story that, people always talk about, the desk stores where they're, rather than building their own desks, they went and bought some doors from Home Depot and just sort of nailed the legs on and had them as desks. And the point being just to sort of bring home this sort of, this focus on keeping costs down and beating people on price. And it just sort of, it's ingrained in the company, like, execution, first class execution, speed of performance, agility. Anyway, it's just an amazing company. And anyway, so I'm a very happy shareholder, particularly over this year. Yeah, anyway. So I completely, and I think all the companies that we invest in, they, particularly at the Series A stage, you've got companies that have proven typically that they've got something that customers want to buy. But the next phase of growth, amongst all the other challenges as the go-to-market and the product roadmap development, and maybe you're beginning a bit of international expansion, whatever it is, the thing that is not discussed enough, in my view, is just how do you take the talent and the promise and turn it into world-class execution. And that is a thing that I think we try to support the most, and it's wonderful to watch when you see it develop.
Well, I think your instincts are correct, because in my experience, culture proliferates from the founders and the CEO throughout the organization, and a founder needs to be able to connect with someone like you, get you to part with cash and invest in them. And some of the earliest investments I've made, like I think of Raul Vora from Superhuman is a great example. He convinced me that he could raise money. I mean, like he was like seducing me right away. Now I was already like needed help with my email, but so I liked the topic, but he convinced me that he could raise money from others. He also convinced me that he could make the technology because he's done it before, and that he could recruit the people and inspire them. So kind of like the no asshole rule is actually not just about comfort, but it's about this person will be able to raise money, will be able to make the tech, will be able to recruit people in a talent war. And even if, London's a great place, but everyone's trying to get the good ones, he actually will, like a magnet, suck the good people to his company and continue to raise money. And it goes down to your instinct of like, I just don't like this other person. This coercive management style is not going to inspire people to attract and retain talent. So it's that personality actually that, it's the company you want to work at.
Sounds like we're in violent agreement. I couldn't agree more. And actually, and he's done so well as well, hasn't he? So he's got all of that capability, but then also a deep thinker. I love his very sort of analytical approach to the various stages he's had to go through. And I remember meeting him actually before he launched the business when he's over in Cambridge. He comes sort of once a year as part of a great group called Silicon Valley comes to the UK, and they sort of do a little tour, a bunch of people. And he was sort of talking at that, and I remember him just sort of explaining, how he was going to out execute Google at email, and he was just like, how on earth are you going to be able to do that? And he was able to sort of dissect it in a way it was completely believable. I didn't know he was raising money at the time, otherwise I would have offered. But anyway, I wish I had.
I don't do it often, but I committed to invest in Superhuman before Raul founded the company and before he recruited Conrad as the first employee. So I was in at the PowerPoint,
Well done you. Well, you deserve everything that you get from that, which sounds, on the grapevine like me, might be a lot. So well done you.
But the truth is, if he was doing another company and was equally enthusiastic about it, I might have invested in that as well. So it goes back to that culture. What are the characteristics? I don't know if I would have invested in Steve Jobs. I remember talking to a guy who led the Series B into Apple Computer, and he said, we really were convinced that the personal computer was going to be big. And our biggest problem was that we hated the CEO, Steve Jobs. So they made the investment, even though they were just in hatred of the CEO, because they were so convinced already.
And it's interesting. And then, I mean, so having said all the stuff I have sort of, about likability and the ability to, sort of give a vision and inspire people. I mean, I don't know the Steve Jobs story enough. I mean, obviously, he was there, he left for whatever reason, and then came, well, I mean, we know the reason, and then came back. So, it wasn't like he was, this incredible leader and CEO, out the blocks. I think there's a little while until he sort of got there. But I mean, talking about the other traits of, what makes a great founder, CEO, and leader, there are, sort of anecdotally, you hear, it's outsiders are often people who, who make great entrepreneurs. They sort of, for whatever reason, don't feel the need to conform, don't have a problem with breaking with tradition, don't have a problem, putting a few noses out of joint, have got the resilience and the thick skin to push on, even though everyone's telling them that, what a stupid idea. I mean, can you remember when the iPad was launched? I mean, just the whole idea of this tablet, it was just like, it was never going to succeed. And then you looked at the numbers, like a year in, and you could not believe how fast this thing that nobody thought anyone needed was selling. And who comes up with that and pushes it through, even though everyone is telling them that it's a silly idea. And so you've got to have something that is, so you can have the inspiration and be, like a decent person, hopefully you have that, but more important even than that, I think, is the ability to stick by your beliefs and to have a vision in the first place and just push through, even if people are, telling you otherwise. And this year in particular, through the pandemic, that resilience, I mean, some of the stuff that I've seen, some of our team members, well, I say our team, the portfolio, the CEOs have gone through just immense challenges. It's just been, inspiring, I find, to watch them sort of go through it, but also helps me realize I could never do it. I could never be a founder. That whole fascinating debate about, is it better, are investors better if they're, professional investors or former operators and so on, which is a whole separate topic that, I'd love to talk about another time. But I mean, the one thing I do know is that, if I did think that being an investor was better, if I was, a founder myself first, like I couldn't do it. I do not
Really?
have, no, not that level. I mean, when you just realize how close to the wall sometimes, the people are going, and how much they're risking, and how much pressure they are holding, like holding an entire company expectations, knowing that you might, at times you might have to let it all go, and what you're going to have to say if it doesn't work, and then pulling it out the bag, and then just sort of waking up next day as though nothing happened last week. I just take it to heart, and it would just sort of, crush me for months before I'd be able to sort of walk out the next day. And I just find it amazing.
Well, Ed, around the time I met you, I guess 15 years ago or so, I had already raised over $300 million of venture capital funding for companies that I started. So I've been through that. So I am the operator turned VC. But when I look now at founders sailing the ship right into the wind to get to close to cash zero to minimize dilution, like they're trying to raise the next round and they're putting everything at risk. I'm just like mind blown away that, because my job is to create like this magic, vintage bouquet of wine of like portfolio construction so that like there's no risk and we're optimizing for impact of a good exit. That, I've like taken all the risk out completely. And I look at these guys like, well, we're going to be out of cash by end of February. We're going into American Thanksgiving and Christmas. I think I can go out and raise an early Feb. I'm like, dude, you're out of money. Are you? Yeah. These people have children. You got to pay payroll. Are you crazy? So like that drives me. I can't. It amazes me how much they're willing to risk it all.
I've seen that in the past. It's interesting you're saying that. I've seen that in the past, and I just thought it was completely nuts as well. like generally, I think optimizing to valuation to that extent is just a bad strategy. Like it's not the only thing that matters. But I haven't seen it so much now because there's so much money everywhere. If anything, I'd say, one of the reasons we haven't seen like the fallout that we might have expected back in March so far anyway this year is because actually most companies were massively overfunded. Actually, and not just the companies, the funds themselves also overfunded. So there's just like a lot of capital going around in the market. So I haven't seen people sailing too close to the edge recently.
So let's talk about that. So in the UK right now, for supply and demand of, too much money chasing not enough good startups or not enough money for all of this attractive investments, what's your sense of the market?
So
too much money out there, or not enough money out there?
Well, yeah. So, I was just talking about it with someone else recently. Like I think quite an interesting stat is Facebook, Google, and Amazon. All three VC backed, a combined value of roughly $2.5 trillion. The total amount invested in venture capital globally over the last 10 years is $1.9 trillion. So that's like, just three companies, funded, late 90s and 2004, are worth way more than an entire decade of venture investing, in a more mature market where companies can scale more quickly and all the rest of it. They just, so I would say, if I look on the ground, I look at like some of the offers going into some of the companies, I might go, well, like I'm surprised that got funded on those terms. That feels a bit rich. But increasingly, I think people are figuring out like, some of these companies can just scale unbelievably quickly. I mean, you look at, I was just digging into Snowflake recently, talking about with a bunch of other people as well, and Databricks as well, sort of, enterprise tech, which, historically was always slow sales cycles, take a long time to build some of these software companies up. And, going from a Series B, in 2014 to, $500 million of revenue, still growing over 100% 6 years later, in B2B software. I mean, these are, I think the value that can be created now, if you get it right, is so significant that actually it does justify the amount of money going in at the bottom of the system. And actually, I think more should be coming in, if I'm going to be honest.
Yeah, so there should be more. There should be more coming in. That's the conclusion. I've got a slide that shows these were the top 5 companies by market cap on the stock exchange on the New York NYSE, like 20 years ago. And back then it was like Exxon was one, Mobil was one. So there's 2 oil companies which have now merged are 2 of the top 5, and then it's like, I don't know, Chase Manhattan Bank. So it's basically banks and oil companies. Then you fast forward 5 years later, and then you see Microsoft is on the list in the top 5. Yeah. Then you go 5 years later, and you got Alphabet, Google's on the list. And then now it's all 5. The 5 largest companies are all West Coast tech companies that are consolidating and buying. And so, like, this is my slide for like Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, of saying, I know you guys love real estate, but don't you want to get a little bit of this? I mean, it went from all oil and gas and banks to all West Coast tech. Get a little bit of that in a very safe manner. But so we're going to run out of time quickly. So tell me about Albion today. So you've got this history of being one of the original venture capital trusts.
Yeah.
And in raising capital, you had Close Brothers as an early backer, but you guys raise retail money, right? How do you do that? How does one raise from retail investors for a VC fund?
Well, so I mean, there's because we're largely raising from wealthy people who are incentivized to save tax by investing in us. There's an annual cycle as we come to the end of the tax year, and there's a whole sort of, I guess, the distribution is really a whole market of IFAs and wealth planners and intermediaries who advise their clients on where is a good place for them to invest if they want to. And sometimes some of them will advise that a proportion of those savings should be invested in the VCT market. And then we've got a team, a great team of on both the sales and marketing side and a couple of the partners who, sort of, market to those intermediaries. And, there's actually now an industry that's built up around this of people who rate the different investors. And, if you want to, you can buy, extensive analysis of our performance and track record and so on, along with all the other managers. And
is that like Cambridge Associates type data, or
the equivalent of that, but very specialist for VCTs.
Oh.
And it's a £4 billion market in the UK. It's a decent chunk of the overall funding at the kind of startup phase. So it's a well-oiled machine, I'd say. Well understood by everyone in the market. So we raise every year, and I think this year, actually we haven't announced how much we're raising just yet, but it will be a decent amount.
And legally, how many investors can you have in a single fund?
I don't think there's any restriction. Our funds are quoted on the London Stock Exchange. They're just investment, closed investment trusts. So I think we've got. So I don't know this for sure, but roughly 15,000 investors. Each of them an individual shareholder across the different funds.
And what's the minimum investment one can make into an Albion VC fund?
£5,000.
£5,000. That's amazing.
In a year. Well, yeah, you could look at it like that. Yeah. No. It's a great. I mean, if you want to invest in some awesome companies, I think it's a great way to do it. And we're all heavy investors in our own funds as well. And then maximum in 1 year is 200,000. So over a few years, some people can build up some decent positions in our funds.
Okay, so that's interesting. So they're almost like encouraged to be like an FOF fund to fund, where you want to invest in every vintage to get the tax, minimizing.
I mean, so obviously each year is the same. It's the same fund each year, but yes, you would. It's kind of encouraging a regular contribution each year, rather than it's very different to the GPLP model, where it's a big commitment made at the start, and it's a sort of 15-year journey from that sort of verbal conversation through to getting your last bit of money back.
And do you guys somehow leverage the network? I mean, I think of some of our LPs and our VC funds are very passive, but a lot of them are incredibly active, and that becomes our secret weapon. Like, that's why a startup should take our money, is that we can introduce Raul from Superhuman to somebody that'll just blow it out of the park. Like I've actually had dinner and drinks with Raul and multiple LPs in our funds, and he walks away saying, like, who cares about Andrew? The only good thing about Andrew is that he introduced me to the guy who invented Google Chrome, and that guy's an LP. With that many LPs, do you have some kind of events or?
So yeah, we do have those events. I don't think so. We do have that network and those people, but that's built up through mainly just our activity, investing for 25 years or however long it's been, and that's I guess the network we've built up. But our sort of investor base, certainly on that side, I think the UCL Tech Fund is slightly different. But on that side, the retail investors there, I mean, they've been useful when we've invested, back in the days when we did a lot more consumer, investing, because, that's a lot of consumers that can go and, buy whatever the object is, or, the good or service that we're investing in. But in the sort of, if you're doing a deep tech infrastructure investment in software, it's a less strategic relationship, I guess, we have with those investors.
And before we close, on investment themes that excite you right now, I know we were talking about technology for RegTech and regulatory technology. What is exciting you the most going into 2021?
So I mean, not that one normally associates regulation with excitement, but I do think there is a debate, an increasingly mainstream debate about sort of regulation in tech, and it's needed. And I think a sort of, a number of high profile figures, you've got sort of Alphabet and others sort of, welcoming and encouraging some regulation, because I think it is needed. I remember hearing, I think it was Mark Andreessen on one podcast once, just sort of saying, remember when we had steel invented, steel could, build homes far more cheaply and far more sturdily, but also it could make warships. And this is the point, is with a new technology, it's neither good nor bad, it just is, and it can do stuff. And if you look at, the marketing industry for ages, if you're here at a supermarket and you're checking out, and just as you're checking out, you suddenly see, a whole load of chocolates and crisps and stuff like that, just as you're checking out, because it turns out that's the best place to advertise there's a chocolate bar, because that's where you're most likely to buy it. Just as here, if you're watching a football match or a horse race or something, then suddenly there'll be a whole load of gambling firms advertising. The whole marketing industry is set up to take advantage of a human predisposition to do something at that time in that place. It's just, with AI systems that learn and can advertise at an unprecedented rate, that ability to manipulate behavior is now so powerful, you could argue it's exploiting people. And therefore there needs to be some sort of new regulation, new understanding of what is okay and what is not okay. Because now it turns out you can really, and you could almost be brainwashing people in the future. Who knows where you could go, but we clearly, with this new power comes responsibility, and I think it needs to be acknowledged, understood, and then regulated.
Well, I think compliance is a real thing for guys like us to deal with the, FCA, FSA, SEC kind of thing, and to be able to do it programmatically, where it's like software is keeping me in compliance with whatever the law is. And if the law changes, software programs are able to keep me in compliance. That's something that I like, as well. So I think that that's definitely a category to invest in. There's
so much coming, and exactly, and it's moving so fast. And then, again, and certainly within fintech, which we do love a good fintech company. There's so much going on as the banks and others are moving, to adopt the cloud, and analytics becomes a greater part of every company's operation. You're seeing huge movements of data around the place, and the privacy implications and the permissions and security protocols that need to be adopted. And there's so much stuff going on in the back end to accommodate an increasingly complex regulatory environment. And then, regulation is often set on a sort of geographic basis. And then, so if you have these cloud environments which are cross geo, it adds even more complexity. So there's, which presents opportunity for the new companies that are coming through can solve all these really knotty, important problems.
Well, Ed, I think we're at the top of the hour. I believe you have a board meeting.
Yeah, I do.
We probably have to cut it there, but Ed Lascelles, Albion VC, great to see you, old friend. Great. And we'll talk again soon.
Thanks. Really enjoyed that. Great to catch up. Cheers.
Bye for now.